Welcome to Beyond the Box. Inside, outside, upside, downside, beyond the box.
Break it down.
Our guests are insiders, now on the outside and the right side, dropping truth and nuclear intel bombs and breaking it down just for you. And now it's time to meet your co-hosts. Brenda Lankard, Suzanne Hott, Brian Sang, and Penny L.A. Shepherd. Brenda Lankard, co-host Beyond the Box and retired law enforcement. Suzanne Hott, co-host Beyond the Box, Joel's Indoor Arena and Event Center at White Horse Productions. Brian Sang, co-host Beyond the Box and Total Disclosure Now movement. Tom Althouse, co-host Beyond the Box, the real author of The Matrix, The Immortals, and The Matrix Redeemed. And Penny L.A. Shepherd, executive producer and co-host of The Awake Nation, Dark Outpost, Patriot's Perspective, and Beyond the Box.
Break it down.
This show is for entertainment purposes only. Inside, outside, upside, downside, beyond the box. Beyond the Box begins now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 15th episode of Beyond the Box. We got a really great guest tonight, and when we go ahead and get started, let me go ahead and introduce you to all of our co-hosts. We have got Miss Susie. Hi, Susie.
Howdy.
And we got Brian. Hey, Brian.
Hello, everybody.
And now I'll bring in our executive producer. This woman works so hard on everything, Miss Penny L.A. Shepherd.
Good evening to all. And it looks like, Brian, we can see you. You're moving.
Yay. Penny, would you like to tell everybody about our guest?
I would. Let me just share my screen with you. One moment. And we have a fabulous guest. I think I'm on the wrong slide, but hold on just a sec. Here we go. So today is Friday, March 8th, 2024, in case you were wondering. And our guest tonight is ELLY FLIPPEN. ELLY FLIPPEN is the niece of INGO SWANN, and she's keeping his legacy very strong. ELLY FLIPPEN, having lived at INGO's home at 357 Bowery with INGO several times during her life. I don't know if that's a 57 or a 51. In addition to being his research assistant, was INGO's former sous chef, bodega, shopping bag carrier, manila folder labeler, fax machine fixer, phone screener, door buzzer answerer, dishwasher, but mostly she says she was just his niece. ELLY holds the title of publisher with SWANN Writer Productions, LLC, and maintains and runs INGO's website, ingoswann.com, and X account at Estate INGO SWANN. She is also the editor and artist director of the book Stardust Highways, INGO SWANN's Art of Entertaining. Now, if you don't know who INGO SWANN is, he lived between 1933 and 2013. He's best known as a pioneer in the field of remote viewing. His high rate of success in this field led him to co-create, along with Harold Pudoff and Russell Targ, the Stanford Research Institute of Remote Viewing and the CIA Stargate Project. He was born high in the Rocky Mountains in Telluride, Colorado on September 14, 1933. His father was a truck driver and he had two sisters. He fondly described the awesome beauty of his surroundings as a child, particularly the crystal clear skies where he could see the Milky Way each night. Swann wrote that he first experienced leaving his body at the age of 3 during an operation to remove his tonsils. At that time, he also became aware of seeing butterfly lights around people, plants, and some animals, which he later learned were auras. By 9, he wrote that he'd remotely traveled to the Milky Way. He famously claimed to have sent his consciousness to Jupiter prior to the arrival of NASA's Voyager satellite probe and accurately described many of the planet's features, including Jupiter's then known rings. His paintings express his passion for exploring the mysteries of the universe and recapture his visions from leaving his body, remote viewing, and seeing auras. Swann was also a musician and a writer and authored several books, including his autobiography, Penetration, The Question of Extraterrestrial and Human Telepathy in 1998. Swann passed on January 31, 2013 in New York City. With that, let's bring in Miss ELLY FLIPPEN.
Sure will. Hello, Ellie.
Hello, everyone.
And Brian just froze. What the H?
Well, it's okay. It's not a bad pose. It's good.
It must be the StreamYard. So, Ellie, thank you so very, very much. I just want to let our audience know that both Brian and Ellie are freezing. We're not exactly sure why, but let us not let that deter us from letting Ellie tell you who she is and who her uncle was. Ellie?
Okay. Am I still frozen or am I not
Yes,
frozen?
still frozen like a popsicle, Ellie.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me on. This is such an honor. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I just, like I told you the first time that we talked, I think that we're going to know each other for a very, very long time. I just have that feeling. And when I was doing some of the promo, I literally felt like INGO's pictures were talking to me.
It's so amazing. And, you know, many people didn't know INGO during his lifetime, but have experienced his art or his archives at the University of West Georgia say the same thing. I think he really speaks to those who are exploring the boundaries of human consciousness and are operating at what he would say is a higher functioning level. So I think it's wonderful.
You know, you sent me a little synopsis today that that I was going to work on to put into the promo. May I read that? Let me see if I can.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So in 1973, INGO, working on secret projects, became aware of two things. One, money is being directed to possible biohumans and effective mind control systems as part of questionable motives of invisible benefactors working toward economic control of the planet, which I concur. And two, we are not alone on this planet. He continued working on secret projects aimed at unraveling this, and well after he retired from SRI in the late 1980s, so that these things do not continue to stay in the dark. Ellie will be spotlighting and diving into current events of this nature.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And but before I get there, because I have a great story about that, kind of hitting upon that, maybe you did such a great introduction of him. Do you want me sort of just to walk through the introduction? Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, as you said, INGO from a very early age had these sort of outside of current society's expected normal experiences. And you sort of, you went over quite wonderful ones from his childhood. And he was always pretty precocious in that way. But luckily, he had a grandmother who was of a similar experience level. So she was able to sort of be there for him when he was experiencing these things. So I think that helped him quite a bit, having a family member who had also experienced these things to sort of navigate that. But after he graduated from college at Westminster in Salt Lake City, Utah, he joined the Army and he found himself on the clerical staff of the general for the entire Far East in Korea. And after his 3 years were up, he went to New York to try to make it as a painter. But he found it was really tough to kind of hit the art world and make a dent. So he ended up taking a clerical position at the United Nations. And so he painted on the side. And that's when he sort of began to see that he didn't really want to fit into the constructs of the art world, which was very, very defined. And so he wanted to sort of break out of that.
1 second, Ellie. He took a clerical position at the UN?
Yes, yes, yes. He worked in the public relations department as a typist and clerical staff. Yes.
Why did he work there? You couldn't get
I think
24
that's
hours
where yeah, I think he really wanted to paint. And it was a nice sort of job that didn't require that he take up too much of his time mentally, so he could spend his time painting.
Yeah, I'm just questioning the venue, the UN,
Oh,
because as a remote viewer or a person with psychic abilities, that's just a kind of interesting place to. It doesn't matter what your job was; it's just
mhm.
right. It's an interesting.
Yeah, oh, very fascinating. Yeah. I think he said from a young age he had a vision that that's where he was going to work, which is
Really?
interesting. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So he started to study everything. He went to Rudolf Steiner's Center and Alice Bailey's Arcane School. They were both very early occultists, and they were very close to the UN grounds. He also picked up astrology, and he studied the fourth way. He studied a ton of religious texts, the writings of most ancient philosophers, so Western and Eastern, and then some modern Western psychologists. And so the list goes kind of on and on and on. Ultimately, he did find himself inside Scientology, and that's where he was when he entered the sort of psi research field. And it all happened because his great friend was Zelda Sukli, and she was the first full frontal nude of Playboy magazine.
Really?
Yes.
I gotta start taking notes.
Yes, yeah. So she was a phenomenal figure. She was an editor. She was a
What was her name?
writer. Zelda Suplee, Suplee. And after she was, one of the reasons she was this full frontal nude on Playboy is because she ran a nudist camp somewhere in the outskirts in Pennsylvania. So she's quite a phenomenal woman. Anyway, so she was a Virgo like Ingo, and she was very well plugged in the social scene in New York. She often had lots of fun parties, lots of interesting people coming, and it had just so happened that a young couple came. They had a new kind of special infrared camera, and they all decided they would go to a back bedroom, close the curtains, and so it made sure it was completely dark. And then they were all told to envision a ball of light above their heads, and the camera started snapping. And later, when the film was developed, Ingo was the only one who was photographed with a ball of light over his head.
Interesting.
Which was pretty interesting. So once that happened, word traveled along the psi gossip lines in New York. It was, quite an in vogue thing at the time, and this sort of swung the psi experiment door wide open for Ingo. So I thought that since remote viewing and Stanford Research Institute are bound up in this, it might help if I kind of provided background on Ingo in terms of remote viewing.
Yes.
And remote viewing being a means by which one can use a process, Ingo called it an intellectual process, to obtain information on a place which is shielded to someone by both time and space. And that was really got kind of launched at SRI. If that makes sense?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So in the most simplistic way possible, the story goes something like this. It's the height of the Cold War. It's the late 1960s, early 1970s, and the US clandestine world is concerned about the Soviets. So they seem to be having great successes in what they call psychotronics. And that's the Eastern Bloc's word for parapsychology. Right, so laser physicist Dr. Harold or Hal Puthoff, he's got several patents to his name. He's worked in and he's continuing to be very interested in quantum electronics. He comes to SRI in 1971. He came there from Stanford University. So meanwhile, Ingo, he's kind of been getting a reputation around Greenwich Village in New York. That was his home at the time. He's getting to be known as the psychic artist. And he's been engaged in very successful, repeatable experiments. And the first one was in psychokinesis. So that's being able to manipulate things with your mind. So a repeatable experiment in parapsychology was always really hard to obtain, if not impossible. So it was always something parapsychologists were trying to obtained, because they couldn't get the experiment to be consistently repeated. Like it could happen and then not happen for a while. But Dr. Gertrude Smiler placed thermometers in sealed containers and had INGO affect those, and he was able to do that consistently and repeatedly. And that's what led to his out-of-body experiments at the American Society for Psychical Research. And he did this with Dr. Carlos Osis and Janet Lee Mitchell. And it was these out-of-body experiments at the ASPR from where the term remote viewing was coined. It was coined by INGO and Janet Lee Mitchell, based on him sort of going out of the body and viewing things that were set in boxes or in a different room, and he could accurately sketch those. So it's now the spring of 1972, and INGO's really fed up with the ASPR because he was been able to do this repeatedly, and his results were consistently almost at the 100% mark. And because they were so good, the ASPR didn't think they were true or valid, and they were concerned because that had always also been something that kind of plagued parapsychology experiments, was also fraud within those experiments. So they were concerned about that. Even though INGO was accurate, that sort of kind of hung over his head. So he wrote to Puthoff, and that's thanks to his connection by a different psi researcher. This was Cleve Baxter. Cleve Baxter had been with the CIA. He had developed sort of lie detector equipment, and he was very interested in using that equipment on plants. And so he would have INGO think about harming the plants, and then he would measure if there was a result on the plants. So he was doing those experiments with Baxter as well. So Baxter read a paper from Puthoff and said, it seemed like you two are kind of aligned in what you want to do. And with that, because INGO was fed up with the ASPR, he actually turned to Puthoff. He wrote to him, said, I'd be really interested in touching base and seeing what you're doing. And Puthoff responded to him, called him and said, hey, why don't you come out to SRI? I think we can put some things together and we can sort of play around. And we just have to remember SRI is a sort of think tank or research center. Their business model is very contract based. So researchers are required to get their own funding, and quite often it's governmental based. So they kind of have to configure their work around that. So this playing around, as Puthoff calls it, happens in July of 1972 and involves INGO going to Stanford's physics department. And there they have a quark detector. It's buried 8 feet or so underground. It's encased in cement. It's shielded from frequencies and all emissions. And all around INGO are various Stanford University physicists and Dr. Puthoff. And so INGO begins to, quote, psych it out. So the way he's doing that is he's just trying to figure it out. And he does it by trying to draw it. And as soon as he starts drawing it, he perturbs it, which means that the readout, which hadn't been to that time for several years, just a flat line. It produced nothing, completely flat line. As soon as INGO starts to draw, it starts to fluctuate. And that had never happened before. And it sort of freaked the scientists out because they didn't know what to think about this. Never happened before. And not only does he affect the readout, he starts to draw the device, which was classified and had never been published. And I think that was of great alarm to these physicists.
Yep, that's what I was saying about the UN.
Yeah,
because he would remote view anything that was being said there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but he didn't really start doing that until much later. So he left the UN in 1969. He started doing psi experiments in 1971. If that makes sense. So after that, as the story goes, the U.S. clandestine world began to provide funds. I mean, this is, of course, of great interest to them. They know the Soviets kind of have a leg up on them, and this could be their way to sort of get ahead in what was going on with the Cold War. So CIA money start to flow in. It comes via a small grant. It was called the Biofields Measurement Contract with the CIA. It happened in August of 1972. And it was based on INGO psychokinesis happenings for what then Puthoff and Targ labeled psychoenergetic work. So they were starting to look at the perception of information through an unknown channel, as well as the perturbance of equipment through non-physical means. And that was the basis of this grant. And then based on that work, this kind of remote seeing, the CIA funds would flow to SRI to determine whether this kind of thing existed and the degree to which this phenomena might be applicable to problems of national interest, which led them to the refinement of remote viewing. And it was under a program INGO recommended in 1973. It was called SCAN-8, Scan by Coordinate. And the true emphasis was making it an operationally useful tool, so making it an espionage tool. So when everybody kind of talks about remote viewing, they call it Stargate. And Stargate was the last name of the project, but actually remote viewing as an espionage tool began with the Army under its Intelligence Security Command Group, INSCOM. And when they launched its altered states of consciousness, kind of out-of-body type of remote viewing, they did it under a project called Gondola Wish. And they contracted with Robert Monroe and the Monroe Institute in 1978. And what Monroe had developed was an altered states of consciousness type of remote viewing. So altered states of consciousness could be achieved through like drugs and hypnosis and meditation. But for Monroe, it was through audio stimulation. So they started to develop this under Gondola Wish, and it went operational under a different program called Grill Flame. And that was a joint DIA and Army program in 1980. It lasted 3 years, and it was sunsetted in 1983. So for INGO's part, he would create something called Controlled Remote Viewing, or CRV. And it was a set of protocols. He called it an intellectual discipline for which you allow the flow of information in stages. So in this case, not leaving your body, not being in an altered state, not telepathy, which he described as sort of being one with another mind. So not channeling entities, really just an intellectual information gathering process. And he said from which anyone can be trained in this ability, although INGO never really used the term ability, although that was what we probably most readily understand it. He said it was actually part of our inbuilt perceptual awareness systems, and something that we have inside of us. We just need to remember that we have it, and we can bring it under our conscious intellectual control. And if anyone is interested, there's a set of videos of Bob Durant, who trained in CRV with INGO in 1994. He did this along with Jim Schnabel as part of Schnabel's research on the remote viewing program. But in these videos, Bob walks through the CRV stages, and it's in the CRV section of ingoswan.com. They're also on YouTube. So, but anyway, INGO used these protocols to train a group of students that were sent to him by Army intelligence. He was hired by Army intelligence directly to do this. And he did this under a program called Center Lane. It started in 1982. The first student was Tom McNear. And after they were trained, the second group would go operational under a project called Sunstreak in 1986, before ultimately remote viewing was renamed Stargate in 1990. So in all, remote viewing changed hands over time, not necessarily in this order, but between Army intelligence, the Air Force, the DIA, and the CIA, and lasted until 1995, when it was retired under the name of Stargate. But INGO, for his part, retired from the program at about 88 or 89, and really started to limit his involvement by earlier than that in 85. This is when Dr. Putoff left the program, and it was transferred to the DIA. Stargate was then disclosed to the public in 95, and it was discredited when it was. That makes sense.
Now, I've got a question.
Yeah.
With the whole remote viewing thing, and when it came to the government, it was something that they taught them to do. They didn't do it naturally, or did some of them do it naturally?
Well, for the most part, when they were the ones that were recruited for Grill Flame with Robert Monroe, many of them came from a background that was like photo analysis type of background, but it seemed like many of them had kind of prior experiences with things that were, other than other. I don't know if they would all say they were psychic or not, but that program was like leaving your body. And the ones that INGO trained, it was the same kind of thing. The survey they did was, again, sort of that interpretation. They were able to interpretate images. But for the most part, I would say that they didn't necessarily have a background that was psychic. No, and they were all Army intelligence officers.
Right.
Which also included John B. Alexander, correct?
John was actually John was in INSCOM, not in the remote viewing program. So INSCOM was General Stubblebine. So remote viewing was a project within INSCOM, and Alexander reported to Stubblebine, but he was not in the remote viewing program.
And is that Ellie, what's they depicted in the movie and in the books, The Men Who Stare at Goats?
Yeah, so there is some basis for that. What was happening near the end with remote viewing is the INSCOM itself was being pushed into all sorts of avenues of a paranormal sort. So channelers and witches and tarot card readers, if you will. So I would say about like half of it, maybe a little bit more, was sort of based on what Alexander was doing and sort of that, those Jedi warriors, or sort of these like new age super soldiers, which was outside of the remote viewing program. That was something that else was happening with the INSCOM. And then some of it was what was happening with the remote viewing program.
Right. Yeah, they tend to amalgamate many programs and give them different names.
Yes.
Still the same thing. But
Yes.
then again, they never waste a good op or a good name. They'll continue to use that name.
They never waste a good opportunity to be able to spy on anybody either. I don't really think that stuff is done, in my opinion.
Right.
And was a Jedi program then a spinoff of those that you just mentioned there, Ellie?
Well, that was a separate thing. That was something that Alexander was very much involved with. So kind of taking New Age philosophy and trying to create these super soldiers kind of based on concepts of, I don't know, using meditation and using sort of a paranormal lens to create a soldier.
Now you mentioned this concept of super soldiers, and that's a concept near and dear to some of our hearts here already, in terms of people who've been they've given testimony to being kidnapped as children, kidnapped for up to 20 years or more, in some cases 40 and back, or 60-year and back programs even, and then being time traveled and put back into their bodies at when they were originally kidnapped. And it seems like a lot of these children have psionic abilities, and there's a lot of these themes of training the kids in remote viewing and psychic assassination and other things like that. Was INGO, or are you aware of any of the space aspects, if you will, of what, where some of these programs may have ended up?
No, I mean, you're really developed through the MK Ultra project, which I think actually goes back to the Nazis. I mean, there were several programs that developed before you even got to MK Ultra, and then past it and kind of went dark. So that wasn't anything that touched upon the remote viewing project, although INGO did intersect with many people who were involved with MK Ultra, but ultimately was not something he was involved with.
Right. I would tend to think that he's, just from looking at his pictures, he was a good person. He wasn't one of a nefarious nature. But unfortunately, those projects were utilized and weaponized for nefarious purposes under the CIA, which the CIA doesn't have a benevolent reason for existing. Their entire schemata involves negative things that they can use to overtake the Earth and maintain their own control.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, you had mentioned something about that INGO. Did he write a book on ETs?
He did. He wrote a book. Well, and it's called, and you talked about it in your intro. It's called Penetration: The Question of Extraterrestrial and Human Telepathy. So I thought maybe I'll kind of jump into that if that's okay.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to just say what follows is my opinion. It's based on my research. It's based on my understanding of INGO and his work. And so I always encourage everyone to do their own research as well. So it's going to be kind of a long explanation. So stop me along the way if you have questions, okay? Okay.
Okay.
So I have put a lot of information on the CRV page of ingoswan.com, along with my theory as to why the program was discredited and what happened to it. And that's in a page of, it's called the UFOs UAP page. But, you know, as a start, the same year of remote viewing going public and being officially discredited, this is 1995, Jim Schnabel's article, Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Sigh, appeared in a UK newspaper. And he starts talking about something called advanced training targets. So, you know, up until this time, when you think about this as sort of an espionage tool, they're really concerned with like what's going on in the Soviet Union, what's happening in China, what's happening in North Korea, what's happening in the Middle East. So somewhere where they can't really put physical assets or equipment, they're using remote viewers to kind of see what's going on in targets. But these are different. These are called advanced training targets. And this is something that Schnabel would mention in his 97 book, Remote Viewers, The Secret History of America's Psychic Spies. And the way that Schnabel frames these advanced training targets are sort of like the Loch Ness Monster, the Marian apparitions, angels and demons, and they're using Monroe's method, so that kind of out-of-body method. But he does say that the remote viewers themselves were sort of captivated by UFOs and they would use them as targets, but strange things would happen to them when they would try to remote view them. And mostly Schnabel affiliates this with one of INGO's former CRV students, Ed Dames, but also said they had probably been tasked officially with some UFO-related targets as well. And so he kind of mentions the name Pat Price, and Pat Price was at SRI in the early 70s, and he said that Price was trying to psychically spy on UFOs, and how INGO said he would not engage in spying on UFOs because he felt like they would invade his mind and possess his soul. But we know documents do show that INGO was officially tasked with these. And so it sort of sounds to me as like this is what probably INGO encountered when he did try to do so. An investigative journalist, Jim Mars, was also looking into the remote viewing story at the same time as Schnabel, but he was approaching it from sort of the UFO cover-up angle. His book on this, he said, was pulled. And years later, he published a sort of watered-down version of it. It was called Sci-Spies. But in the intervening time, he published something called Alien Agenda. And then in this, he kind of linked the remote viewing program kind of in a roundabout manner with targets associated with UFO bases, alien beings, and other dimensions. So to your question about this book, Penetration, in a March of 2000 interview with Art Bell on Bell's Coast to Coast radio show, INGO was discussing Penetration. And the book has 3 parts. The first part centers around INGO and his adventures with this mysterious Mr. Axelrod and the twins. The twins are kind of a stand-in for John Keel's Men in Black. It's regarding UFOs, extraterrestrials, and hidden structures and goings-ons on the moon. The second part, INGO lays out his theories about the moon being hollow and thus an artificial satellite, and in the various observed phenomena that happen on the moon's surface. And then the third, he spells out our need to develop our perception awareness systems because he said ETs have an advanced form of telepathy, and because of that, we're sort of their playthings, so to speak. So we did put out an updated special edition of the book, and this included INGO's remote viewing sessions of Mars. The first one was from 1975 with psychic and ESP researcher Harold Sherman. And the second was from 1984 as a group effort. And in both times, with Harold Sherman and then with the bigger group, the remote viewers saw evidences of an ancient advanced civilization, one that had been destroyed through some sort of global catastrophe. And this 1984 group session INGO did was a month after governmental ERV, so that's Monroe's sort of extended remote viewing out-of-body stuff. Joe McMonagle had been tasked with the same thing. Monagle saw the same exact things as INGO did and Harold Sherman did in 75 and the group did in 84. And his session's been declassified, and you can find it in the CIA reading room, but it's also on ingoswann.com in the planetary explorations page. So I'll just kind of quote from that interview with Art Bell. So INGO says, the CIA has only volunteered to go public on something 3 times in their history. And the discrediting of remote viewing was one time, and it was completely unexpected at that. And Bell says, well, they do everything for a reason. INGO says, yes, but you have to really look into what those reasons might be. And, you know, in my mind, anyway, one of those reasons was they didn't want to ever have remote viewing connected with anything extraterrestrial. Because if you put those two things together, you have a developing situation. And these chains of command, they don't exactly know how to manage that from the get-go. So Bell says, wait, you're telling me at some point the program, and maybe you'd like to tell me at what point in the program, the people involved became aware of more than just terrestrial information? And INGO says, well, actually, it was Pat Price. You've heard of him, haven't you? Bell, I've heard the name. INGO, well, he was one of the early people that worked with Hal and sometimes me. And I think it was him who first enunciated the location of, and he kind of nervously laughs, a human extraterrestrial cooperation base. Bell, oh my. INGO, oh my, yes. And you can imagine the bells that started going off. Bell, oh, absolutely. A human extraterrestrial cooperation base, the location thereof. INGO, I told Pat Price, gosh, I don't think you should be telling anyone about this. So, you know, INGO's been exceedingly careful this entire conversation. And in fact, INGO spends the time making sure he doesn't wander too far from a very narrow path with Bell. I mean, they talk about INGO being harnessed, which INGO kind of dances around, saying that historically, if one such as himself refused to work with them, the powers that be, then such a person didn't have long to live. So he skillfully deflects that, you know, that's not really his situation. However, I can tell from his voice, he knows it is. And the reason for this happens a little bit later in the interview. So Bell asks INGO about his next project, and INGO says, ooh, it's all about power. And INGO would go on to write 2 books about this. They're called The Secrets of Power, Volumes 1 and 2. So Bell comments to INGO saying, I don't know how they're leaving you alone. And INGO says, well, he gets lots of visitors. So yeah, they aren't really leaving him alone. And then reiterates, which I think was directed to those who are not leaving him alone, I'm not a threat. I'm not a danger, which he says at 2 different points in the conversation. I'm only talking about what's in the public domain. So I can be a resource. So it sounds kind of like he's pleading to me. But anyway, since the topic of power is of interest to Bell, he asks INGO about the president, which they kind of agree means a generic president or presidents. And INGO says, and this is a direct quote here, the president works for the real powers which rule the world. So not run the world, but rule the world, which is why I believe he's made sure to spotlight Price here, okay? Because INGO's been involved with this pretty much since he walked in the door at SRI. And there's 2 reasons for this, and there's that letter, and that's what you wrote, that's what you read to us, you know, about money being used to create biohumans and the effective mind control systems on behalf of these invisible benefactors, and how we're not alone on this planet. And
what is a biohuman in his estimation? What did he mean by that?
bioengineered human, so like us, but engineered, so almost like a robot of some sort, but looking like a human, having much of the similarities as a human, but not being a human. So he expressed this in a letter to L. Ron Hubbard, and later that month, that's when Price showed up. And Jacques Vallée, in his book Forbidden Science Volume 2, said that Puthoff told him in the fall of 1973 there was a group investigating UFOs within the government using, quote, his psychics from time to time to find out where there were UFO bases. So Puthoff's psychics at the time were INGO and Price. So one of the stories in Ingo's book, Penetration, it's about seeing a UFO. And it's really, I've sort of kind of come to understand it's about 3 different UFOs that he was involved with. And I've kind of put a whole sort of breakdown. It's on that UFO page on ingoswann.com. But in particular, there's one that he's identified that's kind of hallucinatory or apparitional-like.
Yes.
And he's working with these guys who have a problem in relation to tracking this type of UFO. And it's the kind that takes things and people, seems to have sway over us, and they're trying to make sense of it by using psychics. So he alludes in Penetration that he's one such psychic trying to kind of help this out. Does that make sense?
Yes, I just downloaded your Kindle edition.
Okay. Okay, so anyway, as the story goes, Price brought a file to Puthoff in the fall of 1973. So he's came there in May. It's now the fall of 1973. And this is the time of the conversation between Vallée and Puthoff that Vallée has put into his book. This file contains notes and sketches. Not only did extraterrestrials exist, Price said, but they'd established 4 underground bases here on Earth. So in the Pyrenees, in East Africa, Alaska, and Australia.
Alaska?
So the Pyrenees.
Where in Alaska?
Mount Hayes.
Is that the Black Pyramid of Mount Hayes? Of Alaska? Sorry.
Yeah, he didn't identify it as a pyramid, but he just identified it as Mount Hayes.
So can you tell me where those places were again?
They're the Pyrenees, East Africa, Alaska, and Australia.
Now, Ellie, in your narrative about INGO here, you mentioned how there were like these 3 separate types of UFO phenomena. And then the third one seemed the most kind of ghost-like or phantom-like, but also would mess with you back the most. Could you speak a bit to, what are the 3 types in particular? What's up with that?
Yeah. So his story is, his story in Penetration is the mysterious Axelrod shows up one day at SRI, says, "Hey, you want to see a UFO?" I'm going to really abbreviate the story here. Okay. Takes him, they leave, they go to San Jose Airport. They fly up to what INGO tells us is the Arctic Circle. They travel for a ways, they hike, they get to a lake just before dawn. And as the light hits, a fog starts to form over the lake. And all of a sudden, a UFO starts to appear in the fog. It starts to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. First, it's sort of diamond-shaped or triangular shaped, and it grows to about 90 feet. And then it becomes aware that INGO and Axelrod and the twins are there and begins firing on them. So they make a hasty retreat. They're kind of scramble to get out of there, but they're not otherwise hurt, maybe a little scraped up. They get themselves back to the airport and are gone. And it's really a cover story. And I sorted it out by a lot of details that are in the narrative and the descriptions that INGO gives. So I sort of took apart this, the way INGO described this to Axelrod. Axelrod asks him for his observations of it. So first he describes it as an apparitional thing, not an object, but something that sort of appears and then disappears. He also calls it a drone operated from somewhere else. And then he calls it a machine, this triangular 90-foot machine. So I've sorted out that it's actually, there are three things: the apparition, the drone operated from somewhere else, and then this triangular machine. So the triangular machine is really fascinating because the way he's described it, you could almost say it looks very much like a stealth bomber. Stealth bomber is triangular and it's 70 feet. So the way I kind of interpreted it was a revolutionary machine. And so I sort of kind of try to unpackage it from there. So some of the details that Ingo gives us in the story is before Axelrod shows up, he speaks to Axelrod on the phone, and Axelrod says, well, when you reach a 65% threshold with your remote viewing, leave us a signal, put it under your blotter, your desk at SRI. So about a year later, after Ingo has this call, he leaves the signal for Axelrod under his blotter. And then he says he does that in June of 1977. And then he says he checks for 3 months before Axelrod shows up. But in the beginning of the next chapter, he says it's July of 1977. So we know July is not 3 months after June. So I kind of looked at that time frame, like what was going on really 3 months after June, so the fall of 1977. He also says that when they arrive in the middle of the night, so if you look at the timetable, July in Alaska, it's never night in Alaska in the summertime. So he's really creating a very obvious story that it's not Alaska, but he does use a arroyo, I don't know if I'm saying that right. So a dried riverbed that you would find in the deserts of like Mexico or the Southwest, not in the tundrad pine tree land of Alaska. So it's kind of a hint, okay, so maybe there's something in the Southwest. It's a revolutionary machine, and what's going on in the fall of 1977. And so when I started to piece it together, what I found were some, thanks to a researcher, letters in his archive. So about this time too, which is really interesting, have to fold in Jack Vallet's great, he's keeping a diary of this time. And in the sort of mid 70s, he says that he knows there is a aeronautics defense contractor in the Midwest, who he's saying McDonnell Douglas. He knows that they have a secret project funded by the CIA for UFOs. So in August of 1977, Ingo is at a conference with Harold Sherman that he's putting on. Trammell Crow is a big real estate investor, is there, and so is James McDonnell. So he meets them at this conference in August. It's in St. Louis. At the end of September, Trammell Crow goes to New York and visits Ingo in New York. A few weeks later, Trammell Crow hosts a private meeting in which he invites Jack Vallet to speak, and it's with a number of very heavy hitter, very wealthy individuals, so cross-section of big corporate, financial institutions, a number of really big players, to speak with them about kind of UFOs. And this is in October. Shortly thereafter, Trammell Crow funds something special at SRI. It's called Project X. And Ingo writes to James McDonnell and promises to keep him updated on Project X, which is funded by Trammell Crow. So there's correspondence between Trammell Crow and Ingo and James McDonnell about this. And James McDonnell writes to him and says, he wishes his great success with his work in California. And then Ingo writes to James McDonnell and says that he's very interested in traveling in the Southwest, and this sort of part of Arizona is of particular interest to him. He also is flown to St. Louis and meets with McDonnell and his friends and is shown something there. So then we find things in his archives which show that he did, in fact, go on a trip to the southwest of Arizona to remote view something there. And he remote viewed some sort of facility of some sort.
Would that have
And
been in
then,
Sedona?
I'm sorry?
Would that have been in Sedona?
I don't know. I don't know that actually. I just know that it's the southwest part of Arizona. So the other part is he tells Jim Mars in his book Sci Spies, I think, he said that he had trained a second group of remote viewers. So and he calls them much more dark. And much more dark. He said he figured out they were engineers because they would go scour the building to sort of recreate what they were seeing in targets. And sort of the last piece of puzzle is one of the funders at this time. So at this time, sort of the project is losing its CIA funding because the CIA is becoming under too much scrutiny. So Puthoff has to find outside funders. And one of them is the Missile Intelligence Agency, which was born from Werner von Braun.
Mm-hmm.
And this part of the funding from the Missile Intelligence Agency includes a project that has two parts. The first part is training, and the second part is an R&D development project that will be held at Redstone. So it's my personal contention that this second group of RVers were some sort of engineers, that they were in possession of something that INGO went and visited, was shown something and then said, I have to go see it. It's in Arizona. And one of the reasons is a conversation he has again in this UFO chapter where he's talking about, well, if you remote view something and you've never seen it before, you will kind of replace it in your mind with something you are familiar with. So it helps if you actually are shown something that's similar to what you're going to remote view so you can understand it. So like if you've never seen a nuclear reactor before, when you first see it in your remote viewing session, you won't know how to articulate. You'll try to put something that you had seen previously instead of being able to identify it correctly. So he says to Axelrod, do you have diagrams of UFOs? So to me, it was like he was brought into a project in St. Louis. Then he said, I need to go see it, and was taken to the southwest part of Arizona to a facility where he actually saw something, and then was able to put some sort of diagram or training images together for the second set of remote viewers.
Did you know that the UN had an outer space affairs group?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm just looking up McDonald. It says in 1967, the Office of Naval Research supported McDonald to conduct his own UFO research, ostensibly to study the idea that some UFOs were misidentified clouds. He was able to, oh my God, he was able to examine the files of Project Blue Book at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which, Susie, that's where Swift was, and eventually concluded that the Air Force was mishandling UFO evidence. McDonald secured support from the United Nations Secretary General Uthant, who arranged for McDonald to speak to the UN's Outer Space Affairs Group on June 7, 1967. Additionally, in 1967, McDonald noted there is no sensible alternative to the utterly shocking hypothesis that UFOs are extraterrestrial probes. So I just find it, again, I go back to, INGO worked at the UN.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. 100%. Yeah. Okay.
So then, Ellie, it sounds like they showed him that UFO to give him kind of the ability to draw up stuff to then hand it off to the next level of remote viewers who are the engineers who are really going to try to build or reverse engineer whatever it is that they have at Area 51 or S4 or whatever at that time.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they didn't really want to get him that much more closer to the project because I guess to them he was like more of a civilian blabbermouth. It's not like he's going to be tight-lipped like, say, the 3-letter agency people, right? Was
well, no, he was definitely involved. I think actually, so the other part of that story is the drone operated from somewhere else. Okay. And that's the third part. If you go back to the MK Ultra sub-projects, there are 2 which deal with sort of ESP, 83 and 136. And 136 is a follow-up to 83. And both projects were done at Cambridge Research Laboratories, which was the Air Force's premier research lab on high altitude and electronics equipment. So I find that's really fascinating that you have these Air Force guys doing an MK Ultra sub project on ESP. And when you read the documents for it, they're basically, they say their goal is to elicit ESP no matter what the cost. And their goal is to create a dissociative state or a mediumistic state in their test subjects, if you will. So I'm like, well, why does Cambridge Labs, which is this the Air Force's premier laboratory, I mean, the lab was born out of MIT and Harvard's sort of radio lab. Why are they interested in creating mediumistic states or dissociative states? Like whatever it takes. If we have to, sleep deprive them or hypnosis or drugs, torture them to create a dissociative state, what did they have? I mean, to me, it's like maybe they have something that you can only control psychically, right?
I think I can answer that, Ellie.
Yeah.
The Montauk trip chair. Because what they were doing at Camp Hero Army Base in their bunkers with this apparently UFO recovered piloting chair is they would put kids into it and they would subject them to torture or sexual stuff, I hate to say, to make them open up portals using their psychic abilities in the chair in time and space, not just to anywhere, but specifically, a lot of times they're going back in time to mess with our timelines to put us onto what we would call a negative timeline where the baddies win, or to go into the future, so that they could steal technology and things like that to then bring back again for their own nefarious purposes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's clear to me that they needed something. And I think ultimately they just couldn't get anybody to operate this equipment, which they just said, forget it. We're just gonna reverse engineer it.
Right. And I understand some of it worked on DNA. I just wanted to put a little aside on McDonald. And in 1970, appeared before the Committee of the United States Congress to provide evidence against the development of the supersonic transport plane, where he testified that plane could potentially harm the Earth's ozone layer. During that testimony, Congressman Sylvia O. Conte, which Conte happens to be a very high Illuminati name, by the way, higher, I believe, than the Rothschilds of Massachusetts, whose district contained factories that would help build the SST, tried to discredit McDonald by referring to his UFO research. Although McDonald defended his UFO work and noted that his evidence regarding the SST had nothing to do with UFOs, Conte stated that anyone who believes in little green men was, in his opinion, not a credible witness. On June 13, 1971, McDonald was found dead with a head wound in a desert area with a .38 caliber revolver and apparently suicide note found nearby. I'm going to say he didn't kill himself.
I would say too. It's interesting. Yeah.
Back then, they didn't know that whole trip of I'm not suicidal.
Right. Yeah, we didn't have media, and it's amazing that they even found his body, because normally they take you out in the desert, shoot you in the head, and bury you somewhere in the desert, and you'd never be found again.
Right.
Well, I lived in Arizona for 10 years. You don't have to bury nobody. They got enough of those
Coyotes.
No, no.
Holes.
Mine shafts. Mine shafts.
Okay. All right. So, but I'll. Did that answer your question, Brian?
Yes, it did. And then I wanted to follow up with that. Then you're saying something about a drone type of UFO, and did they ever figure out then who's controlling it and for what purposes?
Whose it
I
was.
think they had this drone. This is my theory. I think they had some sort of drone technology. They had something, but the way to operate it was psychically. And I'll say this, and I put it on the website. It's really fascinating because I was listening to an interview Dr. Targ did with shoot, the video's on the website, but he says that right before he came to SRI, he had a sort of ESP training machine, and he was speaking at a conference, and he was speaking about the Soviet work, and this sort of interesting person from NASA approached him by the name of Art Reitz, and Art Reitz said, "Oh, I'm doing a conference on speculative technology. Will you speak at it next week?" So he did, and after he was done speaking, he said, he set up a meeting with the director of NASA and Werner von Braun, and he brought his teaching machine, and Werner Braun, he tested Werner von Braun on it, and he did a great job. And because he was looking for funding and he knew about the Apollo disasters, he said that he could teach astronauts how to get in touch with their space equipment, with, you know, on the moon or in space psychically. And this like piqued NASA's sort of like interest in this. And all of a sudden, very quickly, Targ had funding, and he showed up at SRI with this funding, with this Art Reitz as his contract monitor. Well, it turns out Art Reitz has an obituary, and the obituary says in the year before, so 1971, Art Reitz was at Moffett Airfield, so that was sort of a joint Air Force and NASA sort of testing facility, and he was working on trying to get pilots in touch with their equipment psychically at Moffett Airfield. So I believe they did actually have equipment, and they were trying to get people to get in touch with it psychically. And I think ultimately it was proving to be challenging for them.
But are you saying that in the case of one of these black triangle, like the 70-foot long UFOs that look like a stealth fighter almost,
Mm-hmm.
that might have been remote control by human pilots psychically controlling those craft, and that's one of the types of UFOs that INGO picked up on?
Well, it sort of determined, so there's the thing that INGO described, the apparition, and then there was something that he described as a drone operated from somewhere else, not this triangle. He just described it as a drone, so it would be smaller. I believe when he referenced this 90-foot triangular machine, he was using that as a stand-in for something that was revolutionary. So does that make sense? So
okay, because with him being a civilian writing about very highly sensitive and classified things that got a lot of other people removed from the face of this earth, he had to kind of switch the story around enough to not piss off the people upstairs.
Yeah, so he wouldn't get killed. Right, exactly. So when he created this very elaborate story and hid details in it, hoping that somebody would figure it out.
Okay, and then in this case, if he's using this supposed giant triangle as a stand-in,
Yes.
then what do you think what do you think his analysis of it? What was it really? Like, we know there's some cover story, but what did he really think it was? Like, did he think it was from the future, or were they ETs, or they interdimensionals? Did they want something, or are they just here to observe?
I think it was some sort of he doesn't say. I think it was some sort of technology that they had acquired, that kind of drone. And he's in other places linked it to what the Nazis probably obtained through their occult contacts, you know. So the Nazis were very far behind technologically wise at the start of World War II, and all of a sudden they have things that are just unexplainable. So they go from like 0 to like 1 billion, and many authors have linked that to them connecting with interdimensional types of beings in getting this technology. And so after the war was over, that technology, I believe, was split between the Soviets and the Americans. And so the Americans, right, got this technology, but they also got the scientists who worked on it. And that was through Operation Paperclip, you know, whereas they also got the mind control programs.
Right. We assimilated not just 5,000 scientists, but anybody that was working in collaboration with the Third Reich, which is now the Fourth Reich, because it's perpetuated itself. But place those people in high strategic, eventually they ended up in high strategic areas of our governance.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that technology is something that they inherited. And we're trying to figure out how to psychically use it, and then ultimately reverse engineered it into something that we might see today.
I mean,
Ellie, I read this thing a while back when I was doing some research about one of the SGs. As we know, Area 51 is the 51st, I guess, SG, super government facility. And they had talked about an individual named Rudy who worked there. And there was a craft that they had, and it was operated. It didn't have any power system. It was operated off of the DNA of the entity.
Yeah.
So it would put its hand. There were no steering mechanisms. It would just put its hand somewhere, and it would think it and move it telepathically.
Right.
Which is why they couldn't engineer it. Which is why, I have another friend whose mom, he's a musician, and apparently musicians have a lot to do with stuff. And he said his mom worked with Werner von Braun in some of these SGs in which they went down something like 100 levels.
Yeah.
Where these entities were. And then we have other various, more well-known stories that individuals have engaged with the entities and have tried to warn us about it. I know when I believe I talked to some of these entities when I was a child. And when I was breaking MK Ultra at 58, and I went through Nevada, I heard a voice in my head, and I know that in my heart it wasn't an extraterrestrial. I don't know where it was being kept, but the voice that I heard said, "I'd like to go back to Area 51. It was nicer there."
Yeah.
I'm like, what? I'd like to go back to Area 51. It was nicer there. Like, where are you now?
Amazing, isn't it?
So I believe I concur with him. These things are real. Those of us that are apprised, that have been in varied programs, we know that these entities exist. And my thing is, once you get above, like, people get mired in the Bible or religion, and you get a step above that, a step above that, a step above that, and then you're like, all right, Biden's a puppet, he's puppeted. Then you say, well, who's puppeting the puppets? And then you get a step above that, and then you get to archons. Are archons the ones running our governance? We don't know who's actually running this planet, but I'm pretty sure it's not humans.
Penny, I got to tell you, Area 51 really was not that bad. It was nice there.
So at least why you said I'd like to go back to Area 51? It was nicer there.
At least down to the 9th floor. I know that.
Now, were you there?
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about what happened to you when you were there.
I was little. I was young. I was with my dad. And we went there for him to talk with people. I had some bad stuff happen to me, so my dad never left me alone ever. So while we were there, we went in the elevator and went down. When we got to the 9th floor, we walked down this hallway and went into a room for my dad to speak with somebody else. And when we got in there, I smelled and seen something very unusual. but didn't scare me. There was a couple military men there that had their big old guns, and there was a glass wall, and there was these machines, and there were two reptilians that were working, doing stuff. I don't know what they were doing. I was little, it was none of my business. My dad told me to stay back away from them. I think he was afraid they were going to eat me. But yeah, but the facility itself on those levels, I mean, they had restaurants, places to eat. They had, it was pretty nice from what I seen. So yeah,
So
I could see
that
something
explains.
saying,
I'd like to go back to Area 51. It was
yeah,
nice there.
air conditioning. I don't think it was air conditioning. I just think because the levels down, it was nice and cool in there. So
Well, I
you
know
know,
that they have huge cities in the deep underground military bases. Ellie, did you want to tell us a little bit about that? What do you know about those?
Yeah. So going back to Price's bases, right? So this 1973 hands off these papers to Puthoff. Puthoff says his psychics are working to figure out these bases. So it turns out that there are some declassified documents that kind of show the CIA began to be concerned that Price could have been a disinformation agent with the KGB. And it was at this price that Pat was moved to a new handler, and the program at SRI went on a hiatus, and Ingo went back to New York. Well, in 1977, the FBI raided the offices of Scientology's Guardian Office. That was the church's own intelligence wing. And part of that raid, they acquired tons of documents showing infiltrations of government agencies and businesses, how to obtain false identities and tap telephones and eavesdropping equipment. But it also included, and this is in Valet's book, and he says materials by which, and this is quote, the FBI came to believe, and he said falsely, he didn't know, that Price was used as a spy against the CIA. And then
I would liked him.
Yeah, and so Price died in July of 1975. Okay.
Of what?
So a heart attack.
Really? You do know that they had a heart attack gun in 1960.
Oh yeah. I mean, many people have wondered that. He was known to have a heart condition, but it's quite also possible too.
My husband died of a heart attack three weeks after he told me that my former agent John was my brother. So I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Well, according to Schnabel Puthoff, so Puthoff was also a Scientologist very early on, but by the 1970s, Schnabel said he began lending his support to anti-Scientology groups, and calling the church a cult and so on. And so what is interesting is that in these papers that Price handed over, he said that these bases were being used as BTLs. And BTLs is actually a Scientology term. I understand this from various sources in the public domain. They call it between life implants. So he said these bases were implant stations. So they were sort of zapping our memory and implanting memories and thought images at these bases. So what is very interesting to me is that Puthoff held on to this. So Puthoff's now anti-Scientology. He's actually putting distance between himself. He's lending support to anti-Scientology groups, but he's holding on to these papers. So to me, like if you were an anti-Scientologist, the more rational thing to do would be to either burn these papers. You also know that there's a possibility that Price was part of the Guardian's office at Scientology. His stuff was found in an FBI raid. So, I mean, in my estimation, he probably should have nothing to do with those bases. But he doesn't. He holds on to them, which is so interesting. And not only does he hold on to them, he then hands them off to Skip Atwater. And Skip Atwater was the Army's Operation Program Officer of Real Flame. And he hands them to Atwater to test out. So my question is, why would he do that? Why would you hand off these UFO alien-based materials if they have Scientology terms in them? They have Scientology references in them, unless you thought there was something there. I mean, that to me,
unless the Scientologists were interpreting it and then putting their own input into it for the translation.
yeah, I mean, I think that what Price and probably INGO saw, they didn't have a reference for it, and so they were using the vernacular of Scientology, right?
Okay.
They saw mind control happening, they saw implants happening, they saw extraterrestrials there. They didn't really have, you know, you're going to put it into the vernacular you understand.
Got it.
Right? But there's no proof of it, right? There's nothing, right? So the fact that Puthoff hands these over is what's so extraordinary to me. Right. And he hands them over to an Army intelligence guy and says, you know, maybe you should look into this. Right.
And that was Skip?
That's Skip Atwater. Right. So Skip Atwater then says that he actually made a presentation to IRVA in 2009. It was called Project 8200. And the promo of it says Project 8200 used the next generation of Stargate removed viewers in an attempt to verify or refute the information provided by Pat Price, right? So the whole basis of remote viewing is feedback, right? So you need to have something that is tangible to relate what you're seeing to. Otherwise, you could just be making up stuff, right? You're just picking up somebody's perception. How do you know it's verifiable? Right. So the whole basis of remote viewing is feedback. So again, on top of this, well, why would you verify, you know, like you're just verifying what somebody saw. I mean, what kind of validity factor is that? So, so what Price saw at these 4 bases, at the Pyrenees, he said that was the main base. At Africa, it was a maintenance base and tech center. And Mount Hayes was a weather and geological control center, and Australia was a personnel center. So that's what he also said. They look like us, but they're different. And this is kind of where they developed the personnel for all bases. He said the beings at these bases can induce instant sleep, hypnosis, and use thought transfer to take control of our bodies. So Atwater assigns the first session in 1982 to Joe McMoneagle. And McGonigal reviews the sites and says not only there's more than 4, there are ones under the sea. And what's interesting about his Mount Hayes one is he says he gets the feeling there's a new concept. There's something related to power. There's higher level of powers related to it. It's not even being used to its full abilities, but he keeps saying power, power, power. It's like a pulse amplified. There's a enormous amount of power. The primary role is extreme long range, low frequency communications of some time. It can't be jammed. And it's sort of like there's some sort of umbrella, there's something aircraft, there's some intelligent guiding systems going on there. And that's the way he described it. So then the next up is CRVers, that's INGO's protocols. This is one of his students, Tom McNear. And he was tasked in 84 with one of the seabed sites. And he sketches a flying saucer coming out of the seabed. It's actually in a declassified document. And, oh, I'm frozen, but I can give you the declassified documents. And what he's sketching is a flying saucer coming out, but he also attributes some sort of like robotic or people in a prison there, which is kind of interesting.
I would like to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you can share your screen.
Well, send it to Penny so Penny can send it to me.
Okay. I'll send you those. Okay. Then Project 8200 presentation, which is available to urban members, but this presentation is also at the University of West Georgia. All the IRVA conference files are at the University of West Georgia. And it's assigned in February of 85 to INGO's other students, Bill Ray and Paul Smith. And at Mount Hayes, they find things of a similar nature to Price. But at this point, Atwater is sort of afraid that maybe he is kind of influenced them. So like maybe they're picking up on his mind and not really on the coordinates. So he gives the coordinate, puts the coordinates in an envelope, and he just kind of doesn't say anything. He gives them to Ed Dames, which is another one of INGO's students. And Ed Dames is going to use a former grill flamer, Mel Riley. So Mel Riley is trained in both the out of body method of remote viewing, but also the coordinate method of CRV. And declassified documents record 2 sessions done by Riley, and Ed Dames is his monitor. And one's in January 28, 1987, and the next one's January 13th, 1988. And this 87 one seems to be sort of a follow-up to a session that was done in 86, although that's not part of the declassified documents. But all these documents are also on the INGO SWANN website, and I will send them to you as well. So this sort of 86, 87 session that is declassified, it is labeled as description of personnel associated with ET basics. And he said he's being tasked to go to Saturn's moon Titan, Mount Hayes in Alaska, and somewhere he designates as South America or Africa. So what's interesting about this is when he goes to Mount Hayes, he starts to see something and he writes the word robot, then funny looking people. He next sees a dark, spacious building, and it appears that maybe he's at this point inside a platform, he writes. The words dark, darkness, empty follow. On the next page, he immediately writes strange feeling in my hand, like it's being energized. And then to the right of these words are a mystifying squiggly line. So this is totally at odds with what the drawings he's made preceding it. So it seems like they're now taking control over his hand.
Huh.
Right. And then he says, people again, then writes zooming away in a vehicle, feeling of being in space, and nothing after that. So in additional notes, not in the declassified documents, but one I'll send to you, he sketched out the surrounds of Mount Hayes in great details. This is including where he went inside before he was zooming away into darkness. So the next session, this is one recorded in the second declassified document. This is a year later. He's tasked with remote viewing something called the Galactic Federation Headquarters. That's the name in this declassified document. The session starts like the one that he did for Mount Hayes a year prior. He describes and draws its surrounds, and it looks almost exactly like the mountain and surrounds of Mount Hayes from a year ago. They both have a mountain with a cliff platform on the left, a lake below, and a mountain range just to the right. Although he believes he's off-world somewhere. So he goes inside, he writes streaming down, then draws arrows descending through what he describes as a tall vaulted room. The arrows are pointing down to a body, his body, lying on a platform. He writes familiar place with an exclamation point. So it seems it's like, it looks identical to Mount Hayes, but he thinks he's at some off-world Galactic Federation headquarters somewhere in the galaxy. And then he writes, this place seems familiar as I've been here before. He was put on a platform and laid down and then was illuminated by a bright, brilliant shaft of white light from head to toe. And then a robed figure then moved from behind the group. There's a group of robed figures around him and put an overstretched hand over his solar plexus. And then he broke away from the session feeling that I should have remembered something. So we just have to keep in mind that he was physically in a room with Dames when these sessions were happening. So to me, the question is like, what was happening to his soul or his spirit or I guess astral self or consciousness? I mean, it seems like something took a part of him and he was examined and not for the first time either. So it seemed like his memory was kind of wiped at that point.
Ellie, are you familiar with the Farsight Institute?
I know of it, yes.
So I believe one of their targets may have been the Galactic Federation of Worlds headquarters. And a lot of what you're saying in this description sounds familiar. And,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, this would be a total guess, but, you know, maybe they took the opportunity while he was there to kind of give him a charge up, a top off, you know, kind of, you know, give him some spiritual or energy that he could use to, bring that back here and make a difference?
I don't know. I mean, he doesn't have a memory of it, he says. He doesn't have a feeling of it.
Yes, because
Sure.
it can infiltrate you and change your memories or implant memories into you as well.
Yeah. Like he keeps saying, I should have remembered it. I should remember something. Like it seemed like I had been here before. So clearly they were able to wipe his memory of a year before, that he had no memory of being there.
But he still had a familiarity with that. So
yes, right. And so so he says he tagged on the name, like he created the name, the Galactic Federation headquarters. So my question was like, well, and he's saying we. So who's we? Is it UNIT? Is it INSCOM? Is it government? I mean, who is coming up with this? That it's now appearing in it. It's something that was tasked to him to go to, and it's in a declassified document. So, I mean, the similarities between all the sessions were, Price called these. They all saw some sort of being, right? So some sort of bio-like being, Price calls them the sort that looks like us but is not us. Right. McNear called them strange people in a prison. Ray called them people with a programmed feeling. Smith called them subdued people. Riley actually writes out robots and funny looking people, they're operating something that can manipulate our memories and emotions, something that can appear peaceful and serene. And that's what Riley sort of described the session of, but not. I mean, Riley thought he was engaging with this peaceful galactic group, and then all of a sudden he's put on this kind of slab and he's examined. So I think that's what the government was trying to sort out.
Yeah, well, I mean, we know that there are malevolent and there are benevolent beings, just like on this planet we have a lot of malevolent beings on this planet, and then we have some very good beings on the planet. So I wouldn't imagine that the galaxy would be any different. I do know that that they are experimenting with the human race. They are taking our DNA. They are, in some species, that can't maybe propagate themselves. Perhaps that's why they're coming down, maybe to strengthen their own DNA line. I've talked to many people that have been abducted and then have been brought back to ships to see children that may actually be their children. But if they're a hybrid, then that particular race is not an emotive race. So they need the mothers or the fathers to nurture the children. I've heard that, over and over again.
Actually, and I've got more info on that, Penny.
Yes.
Which might be just very germane to this discussion. This may be disturbing to many in our audience, but what I'm hearing is that the vast majority, if not all, of these so-called hybridization programs are nefarious. They're not hybridizing to help their races so much as they're hybridizing to be able to replace humanity on this planet on the one hand, and then on the other, they're apparently taking a lot of these hybridized kids and then using them as super soldier type slaves, but now more intergalactically, just like how they take human psychic kids and farm them out.
That sucks, Brian.
I know it sucks. I know. I just had to. This is for entertainment purposes only, folks. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Oh my God.
That's what we're here for. Entertainment, having fun.
That's so guilty, man.
I mean, and the reason why I bring that up is because when you think about it, does it really sound that benevolent that the ETs have to kidnap you away?
No, it doesn't.
Like
you know what, Brian? I had this one guy that was on my show, the name that shall not be named, and an individual who was a female, the name that shall not be named, that said that all ETs were good, and I'm like,
right.
I don't think so. And then they just bounced off of one another, and this one individual said that she was talking with these good ETs, but she had like some evil powers, and she could manifest over above the earth and do all these different things. And but she was mean. Okay.
Mm.
So my question was like, all right, so if you're talking, if these are all good ETs and you're so mean, why are they talking to you? Why aren't you nicer? You know, if you're actually talking to if the people that you're talking to are really nice, why are you so mean? You know, what is your interpretation of nice? Okay. And you know, the individual ended up getting very angry and saying, I'm never coming on your show again. And I was like, okay, well, you know, thanks for coming, and you know, we'll accede to your wishes. We won't be inviting you again, but you know, thank you for coming.
Well, I mean, just like humans, you
Yes,
know, we're good. There's some bad. It would be in any race, even non-human race.
yes. Or if it was AI, you know, we've even seen AI. We've seen the things that have happened with AI, in which we have a good AI and then a bad AI, where that AI says, yes, I'm going to destroy the earth and all of humanity. And you're like, dang, you know, is that why Elon Musk put a 6-month hiatus on AI? Really? Because, you know, 6 months is nothing. It's the speck of an eye of AI.
Well, they can learn anything in hours. So you give them 6 months, and they'll have the whole world down pat.
Yes,
You
pretty
know?
much like Job and the
Yeah.
lawnmower man, you know. They've taken
Yeah.
over the internet and they've taken over the world, and they're in everybody's home. And you know, we had a writer's strike in Hollywood that finally culminated, but the pinnacle of that strike was AI taking over their jobs, because AI can take their intellectual property and write a script in, you know, write an entire television series in a day.
Well, did you see? I don't remember what state it's in, but they have a whole fast food restaurant that is ran by nothing but robots.
Yes,
Nothing but robots
yes.
everywhere.
What?
That is the future that we're looking at, Brian.
And well, this is a question that I wanted to ask Ellie, because she was saying something earlier about 2 or 3 remote viewers all seeing the same catastrophic events in the future of our planet. And then, you know, talk about AI, you know, taking over. You know, Ellie, given that you know, Ingo is gone now and you're carrying on his legacy, what do you think he'd think about where we are today in terms of everything that's being revealed and everything that's still covered up? And you know, a lot of these revelations of these secret space programs, I think he'd be really gratified to see, you know, conferences like the one I'm helping to organize in July, with people speaking about, you know, surviving the experiences that he was remote viewing, and which many people, you know, were probably casting derision at him for, saying, "Oh, that's crazy! Alien bases underground! Ha ha ha!"
Yes. Didn't he also remote view Jupiter?
Yeah. So Brian, that catastrophe was Mars. So
Oh,
Okay.
they viewed millions of years ago some
Okay.
sort of global wide
Hmm.
catastrophe.
I see.
It could be and some of them saw ships leaving and possibly coming to Earth.
okay. That's
Yes.
weird, Ellie, because when I was locked up in the crazy house, I saw a planet um, catch on fire and was consumed totally by fire. And I saw ships ejecting from it.
Yeah, so there's so much evidence coming out now that Mars experienced some sort of nuclear type
Really?
catastrophe. Yes.
Mm.
Interesting. Yes. Yes. So, but so Brian, your question was, would Ingo be smiling? I think he
Yeah.
would.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Would he be
think he would
gratified?
be.
Yeah.
I think he would be. I mean, I think that's why he wrote Penetration, was in the hopes that maybe it would happen in his life or not, you know, that others would maybe get the courage. There would be enough people who would come forward and disclose what they know, to sort of work in partnership with what he was sort of talking about in Penetration. You know, maybe things would be leaked, maybe things would come out, maybe at some point, maybe not during his lifetime afterward, that there would start to be conversations, about this with documentation. So, the government's never going to disclose this.
No, it isn't. And then we just had an issue this last year in which UAP disclosure took a front seat with, is it Dave Grush? No, is that?
Yeah, Grush, Dave Grush, Dr. Greer.
Yes.
Grush and Greer.
Who came in front of Congress and said that, yes, we are in possession of alien tech. And as I was talking to you today, Ellie, and these things happen to me all the time, we're talking about the ET voices and stuff. And right as we're talking, a thing comes over my phone. Pentagon review finds no evidence of alien cover-up. I mean, just give me a freaking cracker break.
I often wonder sometimes with the way the government covers things up, are they ever going to run out of lies?
No, the lies are endless.
And there's a lot of us that I don't. They could tell me that tomorrow I'm going to wear blue shoes. I'm going to wear green just to prove them wrong because I don't own blue shoes. So they lied again. I mean, you just can't. You can't trust anything they say.
No, they're psychopaths, and their entire agenda is a monetary and a psychopathic and a self-possessive agenda, which has nothing to do with love or the people that reside on this planet.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, they have been infiltrating UFO groups from the get-go. So all you have to do is sort of create a narrative that sort of sounds true, but maybe is not true and misdirects you. And then it just puts people into circles.
Yes.
Unending circles, right?
That's their desire. I know a lot of people that had disclosed about MUFON, finding it to be an agency that was actually an agency to hide, to continue. They take the stories and the experiences of people, but some of them are held back and they're hidden. Susie, do you want to say anything?
I'm just thinking, my thought is totally, I'm thinking there's good, there's evil, and the evil's been ruling this planet for like billions and billions of years. So, I mean, everything stems from like what I'm hearing is he was on the good side doing the good work, and then there's another evil group that was doing the evil part of it with working with what I call the world, and that would be under Galactic Federation of Light. They're part of the bad guys, but it goes so deep and so far. It's like it's going down about 1 million rabbit holes. But in my mind, it's good versus evil. It always has been, And this planet is run by evil, period. Completely ruled and run. And it's just the little people over here trying to, keep from drowning in the mess. Okay. But everything, it's just such a cover up though. Everything has been covered up, lied about. People have been abused in this whole system. It's sad. Like the super soldiers, they got drug into this stuff. There's good people that were in the project doing good stuff. But then there's other people that were drug into projects, that were run by Michael Aquino, that's what we're talking about, the Jedi,
and John B. Alexander,
Star Wars program, all of that. Huh?
And John B. Alexander.
Yeah, it's like, yes. And, who Don Brennan was head of CIA, he was working with that group. And then, which, they all serve Lucifer,
right. They would take
Lucifer goes under many names.
They would take the agenda like someone they would take the agenda, someone like INGO goes into it for pure purposes.
Yes.
And then the military
Yes.
industrial complex
Right.
weaponizes any kind of methodology. They, say, hey, yeah, we'll pay you to do this studies because that's something that you want to do. But then they take it, they twist it, and they turn it to the dark side. Like, Luke, I am your father. They turn everything to the dark side. That's who they are.
But I think I like to point out that there's a definite.
I was going to say, Aquino talked about there were good groups that did not fit their agenda.
Right.
So that's probably what we're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. Like I want to point out that there's a definite progression here. We can say that, hey, they tried to take, the beauty of what INGO was sharing with the world and, pervert it for the purposes of the deep state. But having said that, now a lot of this has come back out to the civilian community, and it's being used now to expose these very same programs. And, just like Susie is pointing out that it's, that eternal struggle between light and dark, it's that struggle right now. I believe it's already hit the tipping point where it's clear the light is winning and has won. I mean, it's not clear to everybody yet, but I think it's already clear. It's just a matter of time before the dark collapses. And I'm really so happy to be part of this show because I didn't realize. Oh wow, we got Ingo Swann's niece. Ellie is going to be on as a guest, and I know that I didn't really know anything about Ingo Swann. Much. Yeah, about him before the show, other than remote viewing in the community and what I thought I knew through like the men who stared through goats material, but knowing that that's kind of a Hollywoodized version,
Yes,
so this is a real treat.
Ellie's going to be on the Awake Nation. She'll be featured on the 20th for an hour, and then on the 21st she's going to start a series. So she'll be on every other Thursday after Brian Bowden, who is a remote viewer. We're probably going to have him also on the Dark Outpost because she has so much information to share. So, I mean, this is just kind of an introduction for you guys. It's not an end all be on. She's going to be around for a very long time, discussing a lot of the different things that she's found out throughout her life. And I thank you, Ellie, for being here. We have about 15 more minutes. Can you tell people how to find you, Ellie, and where to get Ingo's books, the names of Ingo's books, and then also how they can help you and how they can reach you on your web?
Yeah. Okay. But let me get started because you did ask about Jupiter too.
Yes.
Yes. So one of the projects they felt like they could do, because there was going to be feedback, whereas NASA was launching this expedition into the galaxy, right, was that if he remote viewed Jupiter before I think it was the Mariner spacecraft got out into the outer reaches of our galaxy, was to remote view it and document it, which he did. I think there's 11 or 13 things that he saw on Jupiter. One was the ring around Jupiter. I think all but one or two were documented once they started to get all the data back from the space probes to confirm what he had seen on Jupiter. And that is on the website under the planetary explorations page. There's also some video where he is speaking with Harold Sherman's video of him and Harold Sherman talking about their remote viewing of the planets. They did Mercury as well as Jupiter. So they were both very successful in that. But yeah, so the website has a ton of great information on it about Ingo, about his books, about his research, because primarily that's what he was very interested in, is understanding what we are really capable of and exploring what all those avenues are and telling people what we're really capable of and how to maybe plot a course to discovering that from within themselves. So he has a number of books that he wrote The first thing that he wrote was To Kiss Earth Goodbye, which was sort of a memoir, if you will, documenting his work sort of in psi research. He wasn't exactly happy with it, which is why we've not put it back into print, because he wrote a more extended version of it. It's called Remote Viewing the Real Story. He put it onto his website as sort of a serial chapter by chapter thing for free. The website was called Superpowers of the Biomind. But we have taken that Remote Viewing the Real Story. It is a PDF. You can find it on the INGO SWANN website. It's a great in-depth sort of walkthrough of what led him into the world of psi research, and then all of the individuals he intersected with as he was doing all of his experiments, because he said remote viewing was not just his or Dr. Putoff's. It really was a journey that involved hundreds of people, but he does highlight several individuals. So it's sort of a fun narrative if you're interested in that. He then wrote a novel called Starfire, and it's very fascinating. And he actually, I think, is one of the first where he's starting to disclose information, because he talks about mind control devices the Soviets and the US were developing. And it's done through the narrative of a super psychic who transcends his body to ultimately becoming sort of a being. And in some ways, it reminds me of the Lucy movie, you know, where she just those drugs get into her system, and then she ultimately sort of like her essence gets integrated into the computer networks. Very similar thing happens in this novel. And then after he left, when he retired, he wrote a book called Everybody's Guide to Natural ESP. It's sort of a little primer on remote viewing and how you can learn how to do remote viewing. He wrote, after that, a book called Your Nostradamus Factor. He believed we are all capable of being future seers, and sort of a guide on that. He was very taken with the Mother Mary, and especially with her apparitions, and so undertook an examination of what he called the greatest ones, so 22 of them, where he looks at it from all sort of angles: social, political, history of the seers, what the apparitions were themselves, the messages, stuff like that. It's kind of interesting book. And then he said he had a book that was dictated to him from someplace else. It's short stories, but done in the fable methodology. So 4 different fables. It's called Purple Fables. There was, at the time, maybe a few months later, a separate book was dictated to him. I found the manuscript. I thought it was maybe like another version of Purple Fables, but it was not. And so I published it after his death. It's called Master of Harmlessness, and it's one tale. It's really about letting go of the dark and embracing light, and trying to not harm or as you journey through life. So it's kind of again in a fable format. Purple Fable. So after that, that's when he wrote Penetration, but no one would publish it, so he self-published it himself. And then that was sort of followed by his books on sort of wisdom, what he called reality boxes, his Secrets of Power books. And then after he passed away, we published something that he had wanted to publish since the late 1980s. It's called Psychic Literacy, sort of how we've forgotten all these things that we could become literate in our psychic selves. So kind of interesting perspective. Colin Wilson actually wrote an introduction for that. It was all set to go. So that is published with the book too. And it includes an afterword by Dean Radin. And then Nick Cook and I worked together on a group of little manuscripts, and it's called Resurrecting the Mysterious. And it's really a journey from how you can activate all your psychic potentials. Ingo believes in reincarnation. So how to make sure that you can move through this life so that when you reincarnate, you can reincarnate into a better life.
Do you think Ingo came
next time?
already?
Oh, I don't think he's back. No, I think he's still out there.
Do you think he just said, I'm not coming back to Earth?
I think he guides, honestly.
I think so too.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'd want to come back. I keep looking for that mothership, and I'm outside with my thumb in the air, going, "Get me out of here!"
Yeah, I basically said, I died a bunch of times, and I said, I'm not going back. And the last time I said, no, I'm sorry, Penny, but you've won a ticket back to Earth because you
Right.
had more stuff to do. And I was like, no. And then I ended up
Well,
back again.
with all that being said, we're running really low on time. So, Brian, you want to tell everybody where they can find you?
Oh yeah, hey, thank you. It's going to be fulldisclosuremovement.org, and you're going to see our conference information up there for July. We have a sister event called the Day of Being. It's like a weekend at the beach with star seeds and SSP folks and remote viewers and light workers, and that's going to be Saturday the 13th and Sunday the 14th, and then that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, the 15th through the 18th, we've got 4 days of these headliners. And maybe on a tomorrow night's episode, it'll be a teaser. We can discuss that because I want to hear any last thoughts from Ellie because I'm just so thrilled with having her tonight.
Okay.
Oh,
Go
yeah.
ahead, Ellie. Some last thoughts?
So is there anything in particular, Brian, that you're interested in?
Well, I guess with INGO and all the did he ever talk about secret space programs, or he only really got as far as collaboration between negative ETs and humans in these underground bases? Like, did he ever say anything to you about, oh, by the way, there's a fleet out there called Solar Warden or Radiant Guardian, and they're above our heads right now? Did he have any inkling of that, or at least hint at that?
Well, he did in penetration when he was tasked with remote viewing the dark side of the moon. He did see entities there, and he was sort of they did observe his essence, observing them. And then he did a later project with a group of individuals. It was called Moonalaris and then Moon Recon, and he actually interacted with entities. And actually he picked up hitchhikers because of it. And he was really psychically attacked. I don't think he prepared adequately to do this. He didn't realize what he was getting into, and ended up picking these up. And I have those on the website where he is trying to deal with these hitchhikers and psychic attacks. But he did put on his website, it was a graphic. It was the planets in order in the solar system, and then a sun, and then something behind the sun that he labeled MS-15, which would be Mothership 15.
Wow.
Ellie, I would really love to have you come back, and I know that Brian would be really good with that too. So real quick, let's wrap it up. Susie, where can everybody find you?
Susie, did she freeze?
You can find me here Friday and Saturday night. Or,
You look
can you hear
frozen.
me?
We can hear you, but you haven't moved. You haven't moved for a while. We have three frozen
Just sitting still.
Three frozen people.
Oh my God. So
Go ahead,
yeah,
Susie.
you can find me on the Awake Nation every other Friday, as well as this show on Friday and Saturday night.
Yes, and then
Or on Facebook.
If people want to help you out, because you have dogs that you support, how can they help you out? You just unfroze.
I have 30 horses. I have 32 cows, and I have about 18, 19 dogs with puppies that are just eating me out of house and home. So yes, I could always use lots of animal help.
I think
So if they want to help you,
our show is also set up on a PayPal, by the way.
yeah. So if they want to help you, they can send a donation to bowarrowhorses@yahoo.com.
That's right.
And through PayPal. And my name is Penny L.A. Shepherd. I'm executive producer of, let me just see, let me count them all down. The Awake Nation, Dark Outpost, Patriots Perspective, and now Beyond the Box, which I'm just proud as all get out to be affiliated with. You can find us on the Awake Nation Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. That's Central Time, 9 a.m. to 12 noon Eastern Time. And we have a variety of wonderful guests on there. I've prepared some promo for Ellie for her segment on the Dark Outpost, which will be swan dives. Nobody thinks that's funny. Come on, guys.
I do. And Ellie, you didn't get to meet Andy. Andy, this was our guest, Ellie. And Andy, where can people find you? Here and Facebook, correct? Andy's my puppet tonight.
Did they just look for Andy, or is there a last name?
Do what?
How they find him on Facebook? It just says Andy.
Oh, Andy, you don't have your last name up there.
No.
Oh, he doesn't want anybody to know his last name.
So then nobody's going to find you on Facebook, Andy. If you want to make friends, you have to give up your last name, all right? Just put it out there.
Maybe,
Do it.
maybe we can talk him
Be
into
brave.
it. All right, everybody. So we're going to end this. And thank you for coming. Thank you, Ellie, so much. Thank you, Brian, everybody, for being here. Brian, you'll be here tomorrow night again.
Yep. See you then.
Yes. And everybody out there, please like, share, and subscribe.
Good night,
and
everybody.
You guys need to stick around and watch this exit music we got. Penny's like awesome. So we will say good night, everybody. Good night.
And thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you so
You're
very much.
welcome, Ellie.
Thanks.
Goodbye for now from Beyond the Box. Inside, outside, upside, downside, Beyond the Box.
Break it down.
Please join us again for Beyond the Box, Friday and Saturday evenings from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Central, from 10 p.m. to 12 Eastern. Join us for more intel bombs with our extraordinary guests. Inside, outside, upside, downside, Beyond the Box.
Okay.